I've been getting countless questions about quarterbacks, tight ends, and defenses all throughout my live streams throughout the week, so let's go ahead and talk about them. S tier talks about all the stud quarterbacks. You got Drake May and Jalen Hurts. They've got easy matchups, while Josh Allen has a bad matchup on Thursday Night Football, but still, you start your studs. You don't worry about that at all. Patrick Mahomes, Matthew Stafford, they aren't facing tough defenses like they have in previous weeks, and they're both in 50-point over-under, so I do love them this week. In A tier, I really like Jacoby Brissett. I started off with him. He's been the quarterback 12 or better in each of his 5 starts. Jags, they give up the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Jackson Dart versus the Detroit Lions from weeks 4 through 10, which includes a game where he only played 3 quarters. He's been the quarterback 1. If he plays, you play him. Jared Goff versus the Giants. Giants give up the 2nd most fantasy points to quarterbacks, but they also give up the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs. So you do have to keep that in mind that it could be a Gibbs and Monty game. And B tier has a lot of quarterbacks I'm getting countless questions on. Dak Prescott being number 1. Plays against Philadelphia. The Eagles defense, they've gotten better and healthier as the season's gone on. I don't mind Brock Purdy or Caleb Williams ahead of him, to be honest. I've got Dak higher because of the higher over-under as a tiebreaker, but it is worth noting in week 1 when Dak faced off against the Philadelphia Eagles, he was the quarterback 29. And Brock Purdy, he's finished as the quarterback 6, 13, and 14 in his 3 starts. He gets to play the Panthers this week on prime time. They're 7.5-point favorites. Caleb Williams versus the Steelers. I talked about Caleb last week, possibly having a reality check in the sense of he had 2 really easy, juicy matchups. He exploited them. Then he get to face off against the Vikings, which is a very tough matchup. The Steelers, they're a neutral matchup for quarterbacks, so we should expect an okay week for Caleb. And Joe Burrow might be coming back to lineups here this week. He gets to play the New England Patriots. Not an ideal matchup, especially with Jamar Chase out. But if he plays, I don't mind playing him. You have Daniel Jones versus Kansas City. That's not a great matchup in Kansas City as well. So Daniel Jones, we probably want to look for easier matchups. He has some pretty easy matchups coming ahead. It's not this week. In C tier, Sam Darnold, we got to talk about him. 1 bad game with 4 interceptions. The other bad game wasn't really his fault. I think it was 38-7 at halftime. Gets to play the Tennessee Titans. They're 13.5-point favorites. You could see another one of those blowout situations where Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet just take over the game. Joe Flacco's in streaming consideration. Again, not a great matchup, and you have no Jamar Chase. Aaron Rodgers versus the Chicago Bears. He's historically beat up on the Chicago Bears. The Bears, they allow the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. But double check my rankings in the link in my bio as the week goes on, because as news breaks, I'll be adjusting players. Baker Mayfield, now I had him low last week against the Bills. It wasn't a great matchup. He gets the Rams this week. Rams, they give up the 6th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, and they've only allowed 1 game since week 6 with more than 1 touchdown. And they just picked off Sam Darnold 4 times last week. Jordan Love versus the Vikings. We've only been happy when we've started Jordan Love in very easy matchups, and the Vikings, they're closer to a neutral matchup than they are an easy matchup. And Bryce Young, I talked about him a little bit in my waiver wire video, but you could start him against the San Francisco 49ers. They allow the 2nd most fantasy points to quarterbacks over the past month. He just came off a game where he had 450 yards and 3 touchdowns, so I'm not doing it, but you could. Trevor Lawrence versus the Cardinals. Cardinals defense, they've been pretty good against quarterbacks. There's no reason we need to start Trevor Lawrence this week. JJ McCarthy versus Green Bay. He's kind of looking like a rookie. We shouldn't have expected too big of things out of JJ McCarthy just yet. 4 out of his 5 starts, he's thrown for less than 160 yards. That's just not going to get it done in fantasy football. Also having 8 interceptions in those 5 starts. And then here's E and F tier for everybody else in much, much deeper leagues or super flex leagues. Now let's talk about some tight ends. You started off with the studs. These guys you start week in, week out. In A tier, I want to talk about these guys. Travis Kelce, no questions there. You start him. He's been great for fantasy football since Rashee Rice has come back into the fold. But Hunter Henry, now he gets to play the Cincinnati Bengals. It is by far the easiest matchup for tight ends. Ideally, Joe Burrow comes back into this matchup, so it keeps it closer. I saw that the line moved from 8.5-point favorites to 6.5-point favorites, so Burrow could be coming back. In B tier, I've got some more tight ends. A lot of them I like. I don't love them. You know what they are at this point. Ferguson, he plays Philadelphia. It's the 2nd hardest matchup for tight ends. He had a bad matchup last week versus the Raiders, but he did find the end zone, so you're happy with him. Colston Loveland, he plays the Steelers. They've allowed the 6th most fantasy points to tight ends, so he's a fine streamer in week 12. In C tier, you've got Juwan Johnson, you've got Dalton Schultz. These guys should get a lot of volume, but they're not in great matchups. Dallas Goedert in D tier. always a good bet for a touchdown, especially against the Cowboys, who will be putting up some points in this game. And then E and F tier, again, for all you guys in much, much deeper leagues. All right, your S tier defenses. These are really good defenses playing against really bad offenses. And you have some more of the same of that in A tier, just the offenses aren't quite as bad and the defenses aren't quite as good. In B tier, you know what you're getting into with these defenses, but you might be surprised that the Raiders are so high. They are high because they are facing off against the Browns and Shedeur Sanders, which is a very sneaky play this week. Regardless if you think Sanders is good, it is still his first NFL start on the road, so we should always bet against rookies in those situations. In C tier, I like the Bears a lot, especially if Rodgers doesn't play and Mason Rudolph ends up playing. I also think the Bills versus the Texans tonight on Thursday Night Football is a very sneaky play. And then in D tier, you have some elite defenses like the Texans, like the Eagles, a really good defense out of the Cardinals as well. But they are playing against high-powered offenses, so you should avoid them in these types of situations. You should play worse defenses like the Raiders versus very, very bad offenses 9 times out of 10. And then for everybody else in deeper leagues, as always, E and F tier. Hopefully you made it to this part of the video. If you have, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. If you haven't already, click the subscribe button, turn on notifications because I go live each and every single day. You can find my rankings and my rest of the season rankings in the link in my bio.